In this lecture, I'm going to go over some of the basics of carbohydrates. You have some typed up lectures that are found in your learning units on Blackboard. I'm not going to go over those in full detail straight through. I feel like they're pretty straightforward, and if you have any questions about that, you can always ask. But I just wanted to hit just on a couple of high points where I feel like people have had some issues or some questions in the past, and maybe we can help you all out with anything that you might have some questions or concerns about. So, in regard to carbohydrates, one of the most important things about them is they are crucial to the body for energy. So, they're going to supply energy to the body, and more specifically, they're going to supply energy to your red blood cells, to the cells in your brain, in your nervous system. So, those cells specifically need glucose, and glucose is a form of carbohydrate. So when we think of carbs, we're going to think of energy. They're going to give us 4 kilocalories per gram of energy. And between glucose and glycogen, which is the storage form of glucose in our bodies, between the two of those, they combine for about half of our day's energy that we have. So, and then fats will make up for a bit of that that's lacking. But when we think of carbohydrates, we're going to think of energy. Think of glucose, you're going to think of energy. So glucose is really one of our main guys that we're concerned with. He is what we call a monosaccharide. That means that he's just one molecule. He's just one glucose molecule. When we discuss how carbohydrates are classified, we classify them as simple carbohydrates or complex carbohydrates. Now, your simple carbohydrates, you have your monosaccharides, which means that's just there's one molecule. They're made up of one unit. Glucose is one of those. He's going to be the guy that we're going to hear the most about, that we're going to talk the most about, and that really we're going to be the most concerned with. So for your monosaccharides, you're going to have glucose, you have fructose, and also galactose. Those guys are going to be your monosaccharides. And again, those are simple sugars. You're also going to have disaccharides. Disaccharides are going to be composed of 2 sugar molecules. So they're going to be composed of 2 molecules. They're always going to contain glucose. Glucose is always going to be one of those 2. So for your disaccharides, you're going to have sucrose, lactose, maltose. Those guys are going to be your disaccharides that we're concerned with. So for your simple carbohydrates, you're going to have monosaccharides and disaccharides. Now, for your complex carbohydrates, you might often have heard those referred to as polysaccharides, which means many sugars. These guys are going to be much bigger, they're going to be much larger. Those guys are going to be glycogen, which is your storage form of glucose. They're also going to be starches. So your starches are going to be polysaccharides, and those are going to be the storage forms of glucose in plants, your starches are. And then also fibers. Fibers are a form of polysaccharides or complex carbohydrates. Now, starches and fibers, they do have a lot of things in common. They're both composed of glucose molecules, but what makes them different are their linkages. They're going to be linked together in different manners. Starches, our bodies are going to be able to break down those links. So in our GI tract, we're going to be able to break down starches. Fibers, we can't break them down. We don't have the enzymes to break down those linkages. So one of the roles of fibers, and it's a role of carbohydrates, but fibers specifically, is that they are what we call roughage. So you hear about your dietary fibers, you hear about your roughage. And what those are going to do is they are going to just kind of help keep things moving through your GI tract. And that's a very important role. Now, so classification of carbohydrates: simple carbohydrates, that's your mono and disaccharides; complex carbohydrates, that's going to be your polysaccharides. And as some other roles of carbohydrates, I mentioned the role of fiber as working as what we call roughage in the diet, and energy. We talked about the importance of energy. A couple of other things that carbs are important for. One of the roles that we say is that carbohydrates are protein sparing. What this means is that we have to have glucose. Our bodies have to have glucose. If we don't have glucose from carbohydrate intake, our bodies are going to find a way to get glucose. So they can break down proteins to get glucose. This is not ideal. This is not ideal for many reasons, but one of them is proteins have very, very important roles in our body, and we'll talk about that when we go over proteins. But proteins have very important roles in our body. So we don't want proteins to be going from their own job to be pulling the weight for glucose's job. We don't want to do that. So when we eat the right amount of carbohydrates, what we're doing is we're sparing protein. We're letting protein be used for what protein needs to be used for. That's very, very important. And the other thing, and it's kind of along the same tract of thought, is that eating the proper amount of carbohydrates also maintains normal lipid metabolism. Lipids or fats, they have their specific pathway that they go down to be broken down for energy. So we want to break down molecules to get energy. They have a specific pathway they go down. Now, if we need glucose and the lipids have to pick up the slack for the glucose, what happens is the lipids basically they get rerouted. They have to go down a different pathway. This is very unfavorable. What this results in is the formation of ketone bodies. It can lead to ketosis in our bodies. It can affect the acid-base balance. It's very unfavorable. Excuse me, it's very unfavorable. This is not what we want. We don't want ketosis to occur. So we want to make sure that we're maintaining those normal levels of carbohydrates in our body so that protein can do its job and so that lipids aren't broken down in an inappropriate way. So we don't want to cause ketosis in our body, and we don't want proteins to be used for roles other than their very many roles. Like I said, we'll talk about those when we talk about proteins a little bit more. So we mentioned roles of carbohydrates. We also mentioned classifications of carbohydrates, and there's several more things that are talked about in your lecture notes that you can go back and read. It talks a little bit about how they're broken down, digestion, absorption, those kind of things. But these are some things, like I said, I just wanted to hit on. Also, your notes talk about some problems that can happen with proteins. Or, I'm sorry, pardon me, with carbohydrates in the body. Your things like your diabetes, lactose intolerance, those type of things. So those are covered in your notes, but these are just a few things that I wanted to hit on and I want to discuss just very briefly. So if you have any questions, please let me know.